much for joining us. I'm Kate Warren, Executive Vice President and Executive Editor at DevX, and I'm really delighted to be moderating this important discussion today on addressing loss and damage from a climate perspective and from a humanitarian perspective. To kick us off, before we delve into our panel discussion, I would like to introduce Greg Poulet, who's Head of Climate at OCHA, to the stage.
Thank you very much, and it's a great pleasure to be here this afternoon. Let me just apologize first for being myself. We had been anticipating that the head of our pooled fund management branch, Alice Armani-Seki, who's here with us, would deliver these remarks, but due to the vigorous advocacy she's been undertaking on climate-related loss and damage, she has completely lost her voice, so she's perfectly fine, and she's here. But rather than her beautiful Italian accent, I will subject you to my Canadian accent. It's a great pleasure to be here this afternoon, to offer some opening remarks on a topic of huge importance to the humanitarian community, that is the growing scale of climate-related loss and damage on the people and communities we serve. People in crisis contexts are on the front lines of the climate emergency, but too often they are at the back of the line for climate finance. It's a grave injustice that these are the people least responsible for the climate crisis. We need to listen to them, and we need to act in solidarity and support based on their needs and their priorities. At UNOCHA, we are hopeful and determined that both the establishment of the new Loss and Damage Fund and funding arrangements and the new Declaration on Relief, Recovery, and Peace adopted yesterday will help us all to achieve the radical change we so desperately need in the delivery of resources where they matter most, at the local level, in support of the priorities communities establish themselves. As we convene at COP28, the challenges of climate change remain not just a future threat, but a present reality. The latest reports, including those from the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, depict a world increasingly hit by more severe climate-induced disasters. We know from our friends at Oxfam that there has been an 800% increase in climate-related humanitarian appeals in the last 20 years. From floods in Pakistan and Libya, to extreme heat in South Asia and so many other parts of the world, to flooding in Somalia and drought here in the Middle East. The impacts of climate change are not just environmental, but profoundly human and humanitarian. As humanitarians, our role in this crisis is both critical and multifaceted. Our world is witnessing an alarming increase in loss and damage due to climate change. These impacts manifest not only in economic terms, such as the destruction of homes and infrastructure, but also through non-economic impacts like the loss of life and biodiversity. Vulnerable communities bear the brunt of these effects, further exacerbated by intersecting challenges like conflict, displacement, and inequality. Allow me to here emphasize that the climate crisis is not gender neutral. In considering the question of climate-related loss and damage, we need to remain laser-focused on the differentiated impacts and needs of women and girls. At the heart of our discussion today is the role of humanitarian action in averting, minimizing, and addressing these losses. There exists a glaring mitigation gap. The window for reducing global emissions to maintain the 1.5 degree limit set by the Paris Agreement is rapidly closing. Our mandate as humanitarians includes advocating for urgent steps to mitigate global warming, including by reducing the carbon footprint of our own operations. Equally pressing is the adaptation gap. The lack of timely, quality, and targeted preparedness and adaptation planning results in avoidable losses. Humanitarian organizations, including ours, play a pivotal role in building resilience through our interventions that have adaptation co-benefits, such as those in WASH, that's water, sanitation, and hygiene, and food security. Research carried out by UN OCHA-managed pool funds, which are managed by Alice, showed that humanitarian interventions are already significantly aligned with adaptation activities reported as part of some national adaptation plans. We need to work further on this alignment. Humanitarian actors are now increasingly involved in anticipatory action as a proactive approach of acting ahead of an impending disaster based on early warning and data analysis. Our own studies show that anticipatory action played a role in reducing humanitarian needs in the aftermath of disasters, providing faster, cost-efficient, and dignified assistance to vulnerable communities and contributing to minimizing and addressing losses and damages. Our experience on the front lines, and especially our partnerships with local responders and community groups, provide important insights that can help inform intergovernmental policy processes on climate change. Our engagement in the official work streams of the UNFCCC, such as this Conference of Parties, is crucial to bring humanitarian perspectives into the global climate action discourse. However, the scope of our action is defined by our mandate, capacity, and the duration of our interventions. Our principles are grounded in humanity, neutrality, impartiality, and independence. We operate in an environment of rising needs and limited resources, focusing on life-saving assistance. And loss and damage funding arrangements have a much broader scope than humanitarian funding. The principles guiding our response to loss and damage are clear. Prioritize humanity, ensure no one is left behind, emphasize localization, maintain urgency, and balance our response to both economic and non-economic losses. The funding for these initiatives must be new, additional, predictable, and sufficient. The recent agreement at COP28 on the operation and funding over the past months, indicating that funding for 2023 will not reach the level of 2022, despite $5 billion in additional requirements. As we look ahead, our collective action must be global, multi-sectoral, and deeply integrated across all levels of governance. There is no humanitarian solution to the climate crisis. Only through a unified approach encompassing humanitarian, development, peace, and climate sectors, and in support of local communities and local governments, can we hope to effectively address the profound challenges caused by climate change. Thank you very much.
Thank you, we are now going to share some perspectives from the front lines through a short video.
Some of our clothes were following the water and going. The sugar, the rice, even our chairs. We lost all.
Hemos perdido nuestra siembra quinoa.
Rafat, Arab, Mersham, so we now enter Iman.
Everything is lost, everything is wet.
Ani dadka walaalay oo miskiima ay gaajada haysatay inta wax la siiyo oo hay'adaha dhamaan loo qayliya oo wax aan cunaa rabnaa gaajada faat walaalay dhamaan rafaadaysta.
I need support for my education and even for what we are going to eat, because you cannot go to school without eating.
Global convenings like this, it is so critical that those on the front lines have a voice in these discussions. Also very critical that youth are also at the table, considering they will be inheriting much of this crisis. So I would like to welcome to the stage Ms. Ana Mejia, who is the volunteer of the Ecuadorian Red Cross, youth advisor for the Red Cross Red Crescent Climate Center, and youth delegate of the IFRC COP28 delegation.
Good afternoon, everyone. It is really great to be sharing this space with you. I would like to share a story today with you. Last year, I had the opportunity to visit an indigenous community of the province of Imbabura in Ecuador. I am from Ecuador. And their livelihood depends on agriculture, and they started to incorporate local tourism as one of the other activities they are leading, and this is being led by the communities, so people can come and understand more about the culture. Culture and rituals are important for Andean communities in my country. Culture and rituals bring people together and strengthen. You will not be able to take part of these rituals and this rich culture that Andean communities have. I would like to share that one of the main festivals around indigenous communities is Inti Raymi, the Festival of the Sun, where crowds gather together to celebrate and show gratitude for the bounty of the earth with variety colorful traditions. Most of the schedules around agriculture are structured in that way that by the time of this festival, they are able to harvest and able to offer this to the earth as a way of gratitude. This tradition is important and is close to the heart, not only of Ecuador, but of Peru and Bolivia. Some members of the community started to innovating, so they decided to change this traditional schedule and cultivate and harvest corn before. They started to do this before. So in that way, they were able to secure their crops, but now they are feeling separated and disconnected for the rest of the community's traditions. We are now taking big steps to discuss loss and damage and advocating for it. Hence, it's fundamental to consider how these elements are affecting communities, social capital, support networks, practices of indigenous traditions, and mental health as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Annie. Thank you so much. I would now like to introduce our panelists that we have here on stage. And we have just to my right, Honorable Saber Hussein Chowdhury, who's a Special Envoy for Environment and Climate Change to the Honorable Prime Minister of Bangladesh. We have Ambassador Diane Black-Lane, who's the Director of the Department of the Environment of Antigua and Barbuda, and Ambassador for Climate Change. Ms. Nemo Hassan, who's the Director for Somalia NGO Consortium, and Ms. Frederica Andrea Manantena, who's the Head of Resilience for WFP Madagascar. So thank you all for joining us today. So, Honorable Chowdhury, I know you do have to run quickly, so we are going to start with you. When we talk about the front lines of climate change, Bangladesh is certainly there and is already experiencing a lot of impact from the climate crisis. I think Bangladesh is a real leader on loss and damage. We have the late Salimul Huq, who sadly lost, as a real champion for loss and damage. I'd love to hear from your perspective on how the government is addressing loss and damage from climate change.
Thank you, and of course I pay tribute to Dr. Salimul Huq. He was a real visionary. You know, I always say he had this remarkable ability to see around the corner. So what others were not able to see, he was able to see. And then whatever it is that he saw, he pursued that relentlessly. So I think it's a huge loss for Bangladesh as well as for the world. Loss and damage, you know, you said we are a leader. I would rather that we had our leadership in some other area other than loss and damage, because, you know, if you look at the way the UNFCCC process has evolved, we started off with mitigation, first 10 years, and then we realized we were not doing enough, and then there is adaptation, then we tried to do adaptation 20 years on, and now we realize we have not done enough of either, and now we are looking at loss and damage. So I don't know what comes next, you know, that's an existence issue. But Bangladesh basically sees mitigation, adaptation, loss and damage as one continuum. You know, we don't focus just on loss and damage, because the language, as we have also heard, is averting, minimizing, and addressing. So that's where mitigation and adaptation comes in. And I think the most important part here, and one of the big issues at COP, is going to be what do we do with regard to the temperature. Because if the temperature increase is going to be 3 degrees Celsius, as we are now told it is on track to be, then everything will end up as loss and damage. You know, there's no point in trying to adapt, because adaptation has its limits, as does resilience. So one is the connectedness, you know, looking at it across the chain. We are also trying to find convergence between climate change adaptation and disaster risk reduction. So I can just give you an example. We have the Himalayas to the north of Bangladesh, which is the water towers for South Asia. Now with the receding and melting glaciers, we are having flooding in the short term, and we will have water scarcity in the medium to longer term. So imagine if your source of fresh water dries up, that's 600, 700 million people, and then it becomes an existential issue. So it's not just loss and damage, it takes it on to the next level. So what are we trying to do? We're trying to dredge the rivers so that they can carry more water. In the short term, we are using the dredge material to have embankment on either side of the rivers. So that is adaptation as well as risk reduction. Bangladesh has been a pioneer in locally led adaptation, early warning systems, nature-based solutions. So, we are trying to leverage all of that together. And the loss and damage fund, welcome though it is still very, very minimal compared to what the needs are. And yes, we welcome the fact that a fund has been formed, especially after taking a decision last year, political decision. Now there is money in the bank, but that has to be substantially more. But again, I think the more effectively we are able to adapt, the more resources we are able to divert to adaptation, and the more we can keep temperature rise in rain, I think the burden on loss and damage is going to be lightened.
And you talked a bit about local capacity. I'd love to hear about how you're leveraging local knowledge and capacity in addressing both mitigation and adaptation.
So for us, the focus is very much on adaptation. If you look at Bangladesh's emissions, it's not even 0.5% of global emissions. So even if Bangladesh went to net zero 2 years ago, it wouldn't really have an impact in terms of global emissions. So adaptation, and there I think local knowledge, traditional knowledge, women's empowerment, these are all areas that we have tried to leverage. And when we talk about knowledge, it's not the latest chip from Silicon Valley. It is what communities have known over a period of time. So how do we harness that? And I think even for nature-based solutions, Bangladesh is right there at the front. And of course, our biggest challenge is displacement. Given the fact that it's a low-lying delta, already we have 1 million people who are being displaced every year. Now think of that in context of a country whose size is that of Iowa in the US. And Iowa population is about 3.5 million, and we have got 170 million people. Plus, if you look at the humanitarian dimension, 1.2 million Rohingyas. And the world seems to forget, with events coming, now the Rohingyas are forgotten. Now the funding for them has been cut by 50%. There'll be another crisis, and then we'll forget about Palestine. So this seems to be a cycle. And yet Bangladesh marches on. I think our Prime Minister, Honorable Sheikh Hasina, is very focused on this. Our first priority is to stand by the people. We have saved lives through the early warning system. Now the focus is how do we enrich the livelihoods of the lives that we have saved. So we have moved on from life to livelihood.
Well, I know you do have to run in a minute, but maybe just very quickly, what would you like everyone in this room or those who are tuning in virtually to take away when it comes to loss and damage from this COP?
Try and minimize it as much as possible. Averting it is not going to be possible, but let us try to minimize it. I think that's what we do. And for that, we need resources, we need local knowledge, we need to get the people involved, we need to empower women. So it's a whole range of actions that we can take.
Well, thank you, Honorable Special Envoy, for sharing your insights with us. I know you do have to run, so feel free to exit.
My apologies. There's a negotiation.
There's a lot of stuff going on, right?
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. I might actually scoot down so you guys don't feel so far away. I was realizing. So, thank you. I'd like to continue on with you, Ambassador Black-Lane. So small island states are some of the most impacted in the climate crisis right now. I also think small island states have been real champions of loss and damage. How is Antigua and Barbuda addressing the unique challenges of small island states? And what are you thinking about as your priorities here at this COP?
Like the wind has been taken out of my sails because we were all here prepared for 2 weeks of holding on to this loss and damage tax, and now we're kind of trying to figure out what are we going to do. I am the director of the Department of the Environment, and my country is very small. And, I'm a scientist. I'm not a finance expert or anything, but the Category 5 hurricane was my country was the first to get hit by a Category 5 hurricane in the Atlantic region. And I remember thinking, I come from a middle-income family, and I have a lot of people we work with who are in low-income family, low-income communities, and we were so worried about them. And I am a first responder, so I have to go out and be there for them. And I remember thinking, I was just watching the video, and it was really emotional for me because I remember thinking, I have 3 kids, my daughter is special needs, and I'm thinking, where am I going to put them in the house, right? It's a Category 5. We don't know what that means. We've never experienced that. I've experienced a Category 4, and that's it. And, so we were trying to figure out which closet to put them in. And anyway, I got caught up with a lot of things, and my kids, I have 2 boys and a girl, and the boys got together and decide, this is what we're going to do. We're going to put food in all the closets we have, and then we're going to pick one. I said to them, if the roof goes, do not run outside. Just stay in the closet. Just hunker in and stay there. And, thankfully, it shifted a little bit, so Bob Yoda got the brunt of it. And so a few days later, we're all trying to sort things up and so on. And there was a lot of ants in all of the closets. So I didn't know they put food in the closet. And of course, I'm like, what house I'm going in? And their idea of food was, the cakes and the sweets and the snacks and maybe 1 bag of carrots or something like that. And I was like, oh, it was really... it was interesting that how they dressed young little kids and getting ready. And this is going to be the life of a lot of little kids growing up. And I was really grateful for them. They were going to look after their sister. So I felt, okay, I can do what I need to do. So although even though you're a middle-income family, so this is not going to affect low-income families. It's going to affect all of us. So if you have a mortgage in a bank, or it's going to impact your pension funds. It's going to, and it is already impacting the ability of developed countries to provide resources to developing countries. Budgets are going to slash. So we knew this, we could see this coming, as you said, AOSIS countries have been on the forefront of this, and we've been talking about this for a long time. So when something like that happened, and I'm a very busy person, I'm a busy mom, I miss my kids, so I was asked to serve on the transitional committee, and I was like, 4 meetings extra, sorry. And it's like, plus I'm on the Green Climate Fund board and so on. But my whole family got hit by Category 5, so they fully understand. So, as, professional women, you want to travel, but you want to leave your kids, people get it at home. And so I'm really excited with the outcome. The previous speaker said it's not enough money. But in my home, and I would like to say to everybody here, there are resources in all of our communities, and we design projects in Antigua to leverage those resources. So all of the grant funding that we have, we give it directly to the communities. And I don't know about you guys in your communities, but the women in my community, they can squeeze, we say 6 quarts out of $1. I don't know how they do it, but they're really able. When you have a budget and you do something, you have no money left over. They have money left over. They actually have funds left over. And so we want to empower them, really empower them to do the spending, to use their community of practice that we don't understand always. And it's not normally documented. So they have a wisdom with them that I believe in, and we use that, and our project so far has been extremely successful to get them ready. So when the hurricanes hit now, I know that those families will be okay.
Well, we have all women on this table here, so I feel like when women are charged, things can get done. So Ms. Nemo Hassan, I'd love to bring you in. And in the context of Somalia, can you talk a little bit about how local NGOs contribute to addressing the impacts from loss and damage, and especially in remote and conflict areas?
Thank you very much, and it's a pleasure to share the platform with all powerful women. we need to to see more women in decision-making processes. I think definitely we'll be doing better than the men. So far, they haven't managed the planet well. Joking aside, this is a very serious issue, the climate-related crisis. It's serious for the whole planet, but it's far more serious for those who are bearing the biggest impact of it all. And I think Somalia, not new to most of you here in the room and those of you who are listening, think of a crisis and Somalia will pop into your head. Long conflict, failed state, several famines, consecutive and the worst droughts recently in the Horn of Africa, but particularly in Somalia. And then now, within, I guess, even less than a couple of weeks, we're now dealing with the crisis of El Nino, where half of the country is actually submerged. So you have families who have been uprooted and displaced due to climate-related shocks several times in the last few years. So we were in that situation. We also have the biggest caseload, one of the biggest caseloads, I think, in IDPs as well, protracted IDP crisis. So a situation which is already dire is now exacerbated massively due to these changes, because even though the region used to suffer with droughts, that used to come every 10 years. So communities had a way of resisting and recovering, but the frequency and the intensity is really quite high now. So the time for action is now, and it's now for those communities who are already suffering, who are losing their makeshift homes. Having said that, there are a lot of good things that are happening in the humanitarian sector, and I really want to emphasize that the type of funding that Somalia has been accessing for the last 30 years has been humanitarian funding, and without that, I think we would have lost a lot more lives. So some of the, maybe just to maybe a little bit introduce on who I'm representing, is the coalition of NGOs that work in Somalia. We have internationals as members, but also as locals as well. But whenever I sit in these global platforms, I use my local hat, and I represent the local NGOs. So coming back to your question, of course, people have to adapt and have to find ways of living with their situation. And the national and local actors are the ones who are the forefront. They are part and parcel of the communities they represent and supporting, and are doing a lot of good work in terms of sharing data. We talk about data and how valuable that data is, and you've mentioned the indigenous knowledge, and supporting that as well. So that is some of the work that the NGOs are doing, is the ability to share, partner with international UN organizations, share that information, know trends on mobility, even if it's livestock or pastoralist. So they constantly share, they're playing that role quite well, and again, not often acknowledged as well. And also, in terms of building resilience, and I guess one of the things that you could use to describe Somalis are a very adaptable community. They're innovative. The private sector is actually thriving, where a lot of support is also being given by the diaspora and the private sector. Mobile money transfers, I think, was in existence in Somalia 10 years ago before it became the way of life outside of Somalia. So I think that sense of resilience, that sense of cohesion and community, it's what keeps the community going. But I think without having a real investment and having access to climate financing, it doesn't matter what we call it, as long as for the communities or the local partners, where the money comes from or how you label it doesn't really matter, as long as it's getting to the people and it's resulting the desired outcomes. So climate finances, is not accessible to Somalia at all. So a lot of what's been used to address and to mitigate and to build resilience is a lot more of the humanitarian funding as well. So more climate finances for people who are bearing the brunt of it, or who have the least to contribute. As the ambassador from Bangladesh said, even if they reduce their carbon footprint, it makes no difference because it's already very, very small. So we need to support them, we need to include them in the decision-making processes, and we need to empower them to be able to deliver so that we are reaching the hardest to reach communities.
Right. Yeah. So, Ms. Federica Adriamanantana, I'd like to bring you in. You're head of resilience at WFP in Madagascar, another country on the front lines of the climate crisis. So can you talk a little bit about WFP's work in Madagascar and how you're working to address and minimize loss and damage from climate change?
Thank you. Maybe before I start with what WFP is doing in Madagascar, I'd like to remind everyone who doesn't know that this year marks the 60th anniversary of WFP. In some European countries, 60 is the year of retirement, but I think we're quite happy that WFP is not retiring yet in Madagascar. Unfortunately, Madagascar still needs the interventions of institutions like WFP, and the work that we're doing in Madagascar to minimize and address loss and damages is the work we're doing with the government. There's a common understanding and acknowledgement that emergency responses are no longer enough to address what needs to be tackled in Madagascar. We've heard in the last couple of days in one of those rooms that we now need long-term solutions to solve short-term needs. So I think we've started to do that in Madagascar as WFP, but hand in hand with the government. There's been mentioned earlier the issue of data, for example. While we are designing and implementing climate finance mechanism to act as early as possible, we still need to rely on data. And this morning at the Madagascar Pavilion, for example, the director of the Med Service in Madagascar reminded the audience that 60 years ago, somehow also the independence of Madagascar, when we were still under French colonization, there were about hundreds of weather stations in the country. Now we just can count on a dozen of that. And when we need to design a system based on weather forecasts to understand if there will be an extreme drought or a mild one in the country the next couple of months, we need to have weather stations or other tools to understand what's happening in the country. And WFP is working with the Med Service to implement weather stations, but also to bring technology and capacity building within the team of the government agency to improve those information. And those information are also used by other stakeholders. There are different mechanisms in Madagascar in terms of pre-positioning funding. We, as WFP, have, for example, a replica partner also on what we call the macro insurance program, meaning that the government subscribes to a policy, an insurance policy in case of cyclone or major drought. And the information that are provided and are improved in the countries through the government institutions are also contributing to improve the capacity, the accuracy of the other tools that are available within the government and the other partners to allow those funding mechanisms to reach the most vulnerable ones. And I'd like to just remind everyone that the work that we are doing as WFP and with the government are somehow, I've started a couple of years ago, but the need in Madagascar is still very, very large, and we still need to expand our coverage and to bring accuracy in the design of the program and the needs and the extent of the damages that we need to address. And those mechanisms or pre-positioned funding gives us some ability to think ahead of those climate events and to be prepared to understand where are the gaps and how can we do better. Acting when there's an actual event is always different, but at least with those funding that we know that could be available when the event hits allow us to get this time ahead to improve and maximize the coverage and the benefits to the most vulnerable ones.
Thank you. And so, Ambassador Blacklane, often when there's so many competing priorities, right, and so much need, often climate action can be pitted against other development initiatives, priorities. So do you think that is an either-or, and how do you think about balancing those in small island nations?
Okay, so I'm from the Department of the Environment. So we have always advocated in any government is that you need to develop with the environment in mind. Mm-hmm. So what we're facing now is years and years of it developing without the environment in mind. Mm-hmm. And in many ways, when we ask who's to blame for that, it's every single person in this room. Mm-hmm. And our parents who would vote for someone who will make their life easier, cheaper, mm-hmm. Better, without taking the environment into consideration. We all do it. And we all do it as it's just so normal. And now it's like a chore it's like putting on 50 pounds because the food tastes good and, you're young and beautiful and then now your doctor says you're gonna have to lose that weight. Just think about losing 50 pounds, right? And then you realize how hard it is. And basically it's as simple as that. Mm-hmm. And we shouldn't make it any more complicated. This is not a complicated issue. And there's no reason why we should have. I've never been to a humanitarian meeting, by the way. It's only been because I'm part of the loss and damage. So, it should not be. Because there's more than enough money in the world for all of us to do well. But we structure our developmental pathways and our social pathways in a way that is competitive. We need to all compete, and we all have to win at whatever price, at the cost of the environment, at the cost of low-income persons. And then we look down our nose at people who cannot compete. And it's fine, I'm going to help them, just give them. We call it internally in the AOSIS, it's like the discovery card, the 2% cashback. That is what we get, to share among 100 and something countries and all of these communities and people. There is a root cause to this issue that I think if humanitarian groups can start to advocate to address the root cause, because there will be the first speaker is correct, the loss and damage will not solve your problems. It's just an acknowledgement of that, and they've moved money from the Green Climate Fund from the Adaptation Fund it's the same pool of funds that you're moving now to loss and damage. But I think I hear a lot about the issue of access, which is true. But I just want to say, while I have the floor, that AOSIS knew that, and we pushed hard from TC1, the Transitional Committee Meeting 1, to Transitional Committee 5, to have direct access for communities. So NGOs can access the fund directly. You don't have to go through any accreditation process or anything like that. Yes, you must make sure that your fiduciary standards is up to par, but I think we would like to see, we had wanted to see a special fund within the whole fund for NGOs, and I think we will still push for that as we're trying to be board members as well. to make sure that community members can access in the way they like and how they prefer to access it and not have to go through the central government or UNDP or UNEP or anything like that. So, I mean, I think we have a root cause and we have some work to do. All of us are humanitarian. If you want to stop what you're seeing, I mean, I don't know how you work in this field. I really have admiration for each and every one of you. That would be a depressing, sorry, to just, like, you do something and you feel good about it, and the next event, you're just like, come on. We're here at AUCs, we believe in root cause, and that is what we come here to negotiate. So our next big thing is mitigation. We're going to cut our emissions like crazy, and you guys need to be in that room and raise your voice when we're talking about emission reduction.
So I think in the beginning you were calling maybe for an Ozempic for the climate crisis. If only we could get working on that. So Ms. Hassan, I'd like to bring you in and hear a little bit more about Somalia's experience in integrating climate action into humanitarian response. Maybe talk about some of the challenges and best practices.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it is a depressing job, unfortunately. But it's a job that has to be done. And when we have our internal conversations, sometimes, I mean, we talk of each other, right? So we'll be a bunch of humanitarians in one room saying, where are the defendable partners? Where are the climate people? They should be here. So I think there needs to be more coordination and discussion among the various groups so that we each understand from the lens we're using to measure the issue. Because the bottom line is that we all need to support the people. We must do better to change lives, right? So for the example, like say if I take Somalia as an example, the majority and the bulk of the funding that goes to Somalia is humanitarian in nature, which means short-term, life-saving. If we had equal amount of funding from the development or the finance that's going into the same communities, then at least that you would be balancing with each other and you'll be addressing the root causes so you don't have to keep on responding when disasters hit. And we know disasters are hitting. I mean, we were talking about El Nino 7 months before it actually started, although the prediction was slightly different. The volume of rain was even bigger than the rivers overflowing, but now both are happening now. So the point is we need to do better and stop working this siloed approach. And we definitely need the politicians as well to push these changes that needs to happen. The change that needs to happen for the desired results and outcome we want to see. So you are forced to use the humanitarian funding in a way, innovate a bit, and in a way that you could be addressing and supporting the community. So cash transfer has been been a real innovation to ensure that people are deciding on their priorities. And it might be money that's intended for water, but the family at that moment might need to buy food instead. So I think that's really one way of giving the option, the choices to communities. Now, coordination is also very important. I think we don't talk about enough how much we need to coordinate, not only the various different sectors, but also within the various different institutions and organizations who are working and supporting the same communities. So having a more of a area-based coordination and ensuring that you're talking to each other and you're supporting and working through the government and through the authorities is another way of delivering better to the communities. And I think because the crises are happening so frequently and so high, sometimes room for learning is limited. So I think we do need to invest more time to learn from one another, to take best practices that are maybe work in one community and could work in another. So sharing that learning, and that's sometimes what we try and foster within the consortia between our members. And I think educating the masses is really important. So it's not only about the emissions, but it's also about land degradation. There are trees are being cut down, not at the same rate as replanting is. I think education and using our platforms to educate the communities, vice versa. Actually, it's not one way or the other. Using best practices from the communities, but also sharing the information of why it's important for you to plant and not to cut maybe the type of trees that you shouldn't be cutting. And this is far more important in fragile settings and conflict affected countries as well. More needs to be done. Two challenges, I think I talked about it already, is the gaps. Funding gaps is there, but it's also what's important, and I think we need to be having those discussions as well, is the effective use of the resources. Where can we use the little money that we have to have the maximum impact that we need? So I think that's really important. I talked about strength in coordination. It's important to invest in that. And I'll leave it at that. Thanks.
Great, thank you. So Ms. Andrea Manantena, Mrs. Han talked about the importance of breaking through silos. And you think about Madagascar, there's a really complex interplay between the climate crisis, food insecurity, poverty. Can you share some examples of some initiatives WFP has done to address this, and particularly working with local communities, and maybe share some of your challenges and successes in this?
Well, the beauty of COP is that even from different countries with different contexts, we can learn from each other and come to the same conclusion of what is needed. So the secret is not that big, actually, but just to share with you maybe a bit of an update on context in Madagascar. A couple of weeks ago, there's a group of scientists, national and international, has shared that, unfortunately, Madagascar has recorded in the month of October the highest temperature ever, which is about an event of a 1 in 100 years type. And the month of October in Madagascar is the beginning of the cultural season, which means that if it's very hot, the entire season is threatened when temperature is too high. Some crops may not survive. We are known to have sad records like that, but I can relate to what my colleagues here have been sharing in terms of the need to address root causes of those multiple challenges and context. And in this context where we recorded a high temperature this year, and where less than half of the population has access to energy, electricity, and water, some of the initiatives that WFP has bringing in Madagascar is the installation of a solar-powered energy hub, which is meant to not only bring water for consumption and for production, but also it is an infrastructure, first of all, but it also allows gathering of the community to, when we've given the access of energy, to be able to conserve food, to develop also access to more opportunity for education, for entrepreneurs to develop income-generating activities. Some women in remote areas of Madagascar have learned activities such as sewing or hairdressing in very remote areas. So it has become a thing in remote Madagascar because of those access to innovation. And it's not only for WFP as bringing a solution to address root causes of vulnerability in the country. It's also for local authorities to be able to bring services to the most remote areas. There are national plans for electrifications, but the country is so big that it's still there will still be villages that would not be under the main plan. So those solutions, for example, allows local authorities to bring services such as birth registration, for example, to the children born in these remote areas, but also for other, we talked about coordination, UN agencies or even other services of Ministry of Health to bring health services around the same investment or infrastructure that has been built by WFP. So I think it brings back the need to have systems or tools to allow coordination and synergies of interventions at local level, first of all, but also at national level. We talked about the access to different funding, different labels of funding, but we need to have a platform or, an opportunity for those different origins of fund to be gathered and to be thought together for the community, for the population of the entire country.
Thank you. We are actually going to open up the floor to any audience questions or perspectives you'd like to share. And do we have a mic running around, or will we? Yes, I think we have a mic. So we have a hand raised right up here, Brent.
Thank you. My name is Julia. I'm from Jamaica in the West Indies. So, Antigua, where I'll be there. It's a bless up. So I'm also from the National Standards Body though, and I'm a member of ISO, that's International Organization for Standardization. And so my mind is always around standards and structures and systems. So in listening to you, heard Ambassador Sabir talk about mitigation, adaptation, and moving on to loss and damage. And I heard Federico speaking about moving next steps. I think that in terms of, I find it a little bit distressing that construction standards are around. We had an earthquake of 5.6 in Jamaica a month ago, and nothing got damaged. Nothing. Nobody died. There was no damage. There was no national damage. There was some structural stability that got broken off and things. So the point here is that international standards can create structures, bridges, buildings, waterways that can be designed to move water out of this process, to create buildings that can retain or not retain, be safe when you have flooding and those kind of things. So I had a discussion in Jamaica when we had the earthquake. I was like, what about flooding? That's the next one. And I was told, no, and it happened right the next week. So there are systems and there are structures and standards that can be put in place to prevent an ongoing, repetitive situation. And I'm really putting forward that there are ISO standards, there are national standards, and there are standards in almost every region that you can copy, adopt, to use to create structures that can prevent this repetitive scenario. Additionally, Ambassador, you mentioned climate change and best practices, traditional knowledge. That is something that I think we need to document and put in a place where we can access. I have a farm, and my own personal farm, a little thing. We have 25 trees, banana trees, and the last hurricane, everyone went flat. Somebody said, cut the leaves so that the wind has less lift. And the next hurricane, nothing went. So I'm saying there are best practices in each area. We can document, we can put in some kind of database, where in that database we can access what did Somalia do, what did Antigua do, and we can grow through that. And I think that if we have standards for construction, standards for procurement, standards for even how to measure the data that comes, how to ensure that investors will have that information to design risk pools for us, we can accelerate the response to climate change. So I really am encouraging us to look at international standards, and international because we want the players, United Nations, and the players to use a common language. We can have our local standards, but that may not be as acceptable. So we need to look at structured consistency, standardize what we do to prevent the repetitive loss. We have standards for food safety systems. How do you secure food and repeat? So we have food security, and that's a continuity. We all are in the same climatic zone. So we all have the same response. We are between Tropic of Cancer and Tropic of Cape. Right?
So when it comes to these standardizations, Ambassador Blackland, do you have any thoughts on this and how you're thinking about it?
Yeah, so thanks for the idea, but standardization comes at a high cost. So in the Caribbean, where you and I live, we have a robust banking system and financial system, so you can go and borrow. But in many countries like this, that's not available. So in Antigua and Barbuda, we actually improved our standards. So in Antigua, a typical home can get hit with a category 3, but and withstand it, but category 5, you know. So we put in place a fund, which you can think about. And we provided the fund with a 2% fee, not interest, and the fund was provided, the money was provided by the Green Climate Fund. So just a lesson learned, if you call it an interest, you have to send the interest payment back to the Green Climate Fund. So we called it a processing fee.
Service fee.
And yeah, so just keep that in mind. And it's only 2%, and we're a middle high income country. So, and when we started that process, we were told first we applied to the adaptation fund, and they said, no, that would never be allowed. So I'm like, you cannot understand the motivation of a woman. I just like, it's not if it's going to happen, it's like how much money we're going to get. So I think you should say the same thing. So with that funding, we were now able to only then to implement standards. And then we also had to do something else to make the cost as cheap as possible, which is purchase in bulk. So everybody's going to use the same solar panel systems, maybe a little bit of battery. And so we went through our Chinese and using our foreign affairs contact. And now we're bringing in water storage, electricity in bulk. And that reduced the cost for us by a whopping 70%. So, and then if there's a storm, like we had a rain event the other day, we offer payment forgiveness. So if anything happens like a flood or a drought, we put that into the contract we have with our borrowers. And nobody asks about it, but it's not in place. It's parametric to make it easier. So if you have a flood or something like that, they don't have to pay it back. And so a lot of people came forward and borrowed was in the pilot phases, and we're going to keep replenishing it. So I think that has been a great success. And then we start adding standards a little bit at a time and a little bit of time. And so we link standardization to the access to the financing. It has to go along with each other. You cannot just put it in place because persons would not be able to afford it. And then the private sector sometimes, not all the time, will up their prices because they know it's a compliance issue. And so we have to be very careful. Like electric cars in the States is so expensive. That's because it's a compliance issue, and then the government is going to subsidize it. But in many low-income countries like yours, it has to be designed very differently. It has to be a facilitative approach rather than a regulatory approach.
I think we have another question right here.
Can I?
Yeah, I think you're.
So what is it?
Oh yeah. Yeah, do you want?
Yeah. Sorry, I just wanted to add something in a way that standardization doesn't take only money, but it takes time also. Mm-hmm. And in Madagascar, we have designed and updated, I think, last year, the standards for cyclone-resistant building. The year where we were hit by 6 cyclones, and within the weirdest record we have, this year we have the same cyclone who came back twice, while we didn't even have the time to think how to implement those standards, but understand and agree that it is indeed one way to address that, but it takes time, and we need to understand how to bring it into life.
Thank you.
Yeah, Jasper Linke from Impact Initiatives REACH, together with OCHA, or under the leadership of OCHA, we collect a lot of data for the humanitarian sector and most humanitarian crises. So from a data perspective, because you mentioned that there's, of course, a lack of data, but also a lack of kind of a more proactive approach, an integrated approach in the humanitarian sector. do you think that, and I don't know how familiar you are with humanitarian needs assessments that are conducted to inform humanitarian planning, but do you think that there also needs to be a change in the data that we collect to inform humanitarian planning? Because, of course, due to the nature of the humanitarian sector, it's very much focused on measuring the symptoms, basically just asking about the so-called objective, using objective measures to measure the situation of people, and then the humanitarian sector uses mostly cookie-cutter approaches just due to the nature of the work to respond to that, but there is much less flexibility. So do you think there needs to be a change in that?
Well, Frederica, I know you talked a bit about importance of data. I don't know if you want to take that first and then anyone else.
Yeah, I can start.
Yeah.
I don't think there is a need to change the way we collect or analyze data for humanitarian needs, but there's definitely need to align all the different type of interventions that derives from those analyses. Just in the context of Madagascar, we have the macro insurance program, which is based on humanitarian data somehow, and we have the anticipatory action plans, and we have the emergency plans for response, and I think we have a dozen of plans that needs to be implemented in the same location, a vulnerable location. So I think the idea is more to understand, with all the data that we have, that we collect through different ways, how we put them together to make harmonized, integrated response plan, whatever type of response it brings in.
So Sandra, do you want to weigh in?
I think you said exactly what I would have said, but maybe I'll just repeat it differently. Data is important and is key, but it's what you do with that data and how widely you share that data as well. I think that's important. There's one element of data analysis or collection that we miss as institutions and organizations. We don't go back to the communities and tell them what the data was for. And we don't coordinate when we're collecting the data as well. So you could have the similar types of organization asking the same questions to the same communities within a week or within a month together. So I think we can definitely improve on how we better coordinate when we collect that data. And it's really important to take that data back to the community, explain to them what you are going to do with that data, because a lot of communities give us the feedback that they're tired. Your friends came and talked to us last week, and we've not heard back anything from them. So I think it's important to feed back to the community.
Right, so I'm a scientist, so I love data. And I remember when we were doing the loans, we had to publish a dashboard, and we had a very simplified dashboard, very easy, straightforward. We had an evaluation, a formal evaluation done, and the evaluator came up with this fancy-looking dashboard that I'm a scientist. I'm like, I don't even understand all of that stuff. Can we just keep it simple? That's first thing. I mean, we're a much smaller country, but people got fed up with us with data. Every consultant need their own data. And so we decided we have a data management unit that does all of that. And to make it a little bit more exciting this year for data collection, we actually worked with the churches and the community center, and we actually had a raffle for electric vehicle. It was really nice. And the community groups could sell the raffle tickets, collect the money, keep the money, and give us the data. And then we don't need data, we just need the data enough distributed to fill enough of a gap, and then you can use AI to fill in with some assumptions that you would have based on your work and your own knowledge, expert knowledge, and then to minimize that question about data collection, which people are fed up of, by the way. So I think we need to, all of these consultants and these contracts that we're issuing, please, about data, you have to have consultation and so on. Just remember, every consultant have that. So people are fed up of seeing that. So maybe that's something you should think about a little bit more. But AI is coming up on board, and you should try and use that as much as possible to help.
Yeah. We'll go to you and then to you.
Thank you. My name is Tom. I am from Give Directly, and I wanted to talk about knowledge, capacities, and expertise. I'm coming from a talk next door just a few minutes back, and we're listening to 4 very brave young people talking about how climate has impacted them and also the solutions that they're bringing. And I want to tie that in with what Diane said with respect to how women know how to use money best. As Give Directly, we champion cash, and I think the message that we want to carry as we are thinking about loss and damage with respect to fairness and justice, I think providing the agency to people is what is going to help them to be able to adopt climate action effectively. We need to be thinking about how do we make sure that we get a significant portion of loss and damage directly into the hands of people that need it, because they have the solution. All that they're missing is capital. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone want to respond to the importance of cash? I know, Ms. Masson, you talked about that.
So when we were at the first meeting of the Transitional Committee, one of the features we're talking about is accessing the funds with dignity. And in many countries, we talk about vulnerable women. And from where I come from, women have found that the important way to maintain our not vulnerable status, we don't see ourselves as vulnerable. We see ourselves as in a position where others can make us vulnerable. And to minimize the people somebody else making us vulnerable, we control our own funds. So if a woman in Antigua and Barbuda see anyone coming, and I just want to be straight with you, white male or man coming to, I'm going to offer you money, it triggers something in her mind. And she's not comfortable with it. So I've heard you say the cash transfer. Cash transfer is really the best way for you to support, especially women with their children. It's really important for a young child to see the parents giving them something rather than somebody giving them a handout. That vision and that visual impact is, if you want to break the cycle, right, you have to show the parent giving the child that empower the parent so you can break that cycle as well. So I think it's really important. And in Antigua where that occurs, we've seen that the money is being used for and we would have this argument, like some people would say, oh, she's going to use it to get her nails done or her hair done or buy clothes and stuff like that. And I'm saying, like these two negotiations are tough. Like these, on the Transitional Committee, some of you would have been in the meeting. The meetings are really difficult. And as a woman, you're there you should see some of the photos where, all my male counterparts from the G77, like, oh gosh, you're being so difficult. And really, I'll just tell you my secret, so I make sure my toes are well done. So when things are rough and you're looking down, because you feel pressed upon, you tend to look down, you see those beautifully, nicely painted toes. It just does something for you. If you really want to empower women, you empower all of that a woman can be. And there's nothing more powerful than a woman. She feels beautiful, she feels clean. From there onwards, she can do anything, which is the point of getting her dignity back on her own feet. And so we see the idea of humanitarianism, not just giving her something to eat and so on, like empower her, give her that, give a plus her partner as well. And let the children see that as something to do. So I'm all for cash transfer. I think it's much easier it just works.
We have one question over here.
Yeah, thank you very much. My name's Gordon Rattray. I'm from European Disability Forum. My question was actually similar to what has just been discussed, but maybe I'll go into a little bit more detail. So the presentations so far have been excellent, informative, but what I've missed is explicit mention of persons with disabilities. As we know, that's more than 15% of the global population and face a mortality rate of up to 4 times that of everybody else in humanitarian contexts. So to go back to the question, I'm wondering what plans there would be for loss and damage funding to be accessible to organisations of persons with disabilities as equal partners rather than being seen as recipients. So it's somehow related to what you were talking about vulnerability, but it's about building the strength of the disability movement to be able to participate, to recognise their skills and their knowledge as an equal partner in humanitarian response.
Yeah, no, thank you. Important perspective. Anyone?
Maybe I can try. No, you're absolutely right, and shame on us for not bringing the vulnerabilities within the vulnerabilities. For example, if you look at the position of national partners in Somalia, it's a spectrum. So even the bigger national organizations that everybody prefers to work with them because they know them and they've worked with them, they still are not having a partnership which has equity and which is equal, as you said. And then you have the marginalized groups which are right down at the other spectrum, at the other end of the spectrum. So it's really important to empower and include all voices across the community, so women-led organizations. There are many households where female-led households. There are organizations and small networks that are women-led and people with disability, marginalized and minority communities as well. So I think it's really important that we keep bringing that up explicitly, and thank you for the question. I have a next session next time in this room, and I will bring that up again. But it's really important. It's important to include everyone. We talk about inclusion, but sometimes there's a lot of rhetoric as opposed to practice. So we need to action in a lot of the commitments and the rhetoric that we have as international communities, as governments as well as UN. So yes, we need to speak more of that and explicitly address that smaller group which are part of the bigger vulnerable, smaller entities as well. Yeah.
Thank you. So we have time for a couple more questions. I see Will in the back and a woman right here in the front. So if we can get...
Thank you. Congratulations for the panel. I will underline that I think that we have to put on the COP agenda the migration issue, because it's not only a question of money, it's also a question of public policies about migrations in the northern countries. This is a problem because the rich countries that are responsible of the main damage, they also have put in barriers for people coming from the south, and this is the situation in the United States, this is the situation in Europe, and many countries also in the south when are run by right-wing parties. And I think that it's an issue of human rights, and everybody have to go everywhere in all the world. And we have a treaty on migrant workers that we have to lobby about this, and we have to link climate crisis and migration more than is in this COP.
Yeah, for sure. I'm going to take Will's question and then we'll address both. So,
thanks, everybody. Will Worley at the New Humanitarian. Diane Black-Lane, a question for yourself, please. Your colleague on the TC, Mikai Robinson, reportedly said this morning that the early agreement on the loss and damage fund has led to a narrative that we need to be grateful and be quiet. This is the undertone going on to this COP. You talked about the early win. Maybe you could expound upon that a bit, if you share that view or not, and outline the next steps that is needed for setting up an effective loss and damage fund, please.
Right. Well, do you want to take that first, and then we can tackle the migration mobility?
I mean, he's absolutely correct. That is our view. The fact that we're here, I think Mr. Saber had said that we have to be sitting on and forming a fund for loss and damage. It's a failure of this whole process. We failed. And so now we have to find some way to provide really tiny amount of money to fix this. I mean, when you look at the cost of loss and damage, and we're not only talking about in developing countries, but in developed countries, we are all going to be affected regardless of where you live. So But anyway, so be that we are here in a multilateral process and we want to work with our colleagues. But the fact that you formed the fund doesn't mean we're going to dial back on the other funds, because adaptation is important. So it's good for your countries to get adaptation. So you can, when there is an event, you can like, I don't have anything to do. Wouldn't that be nice? And so, so we're going to keep pushing and keep advocating. AOSIS is not going to keep quiet ever. And we, one of the great things that we do when we push for ourselves, many other countries benefit, and we've seen that. And so we will continue to be speaking out, because in some cases, other countries cannot. But in case of ours, I mean, what do we have to lose? We're going to piss off somebody, we're going to get people upset, and then we're going to lose our country. Those are our options. So we're going to speak out always.
And to the migration mobility challenge, I mean, I think actually one of the ways you can get some of the right-wing politicians who are sometimes climate deniers to care about climate is the threat of migration. But there's also a lot of potential opportunity with planned migration as even being part of the solution. So I don't know if either of you have thoughts on that.
Well, I'm not going to talk on behalf of any government or politician, as you say, but I think the way we approach it as let's say an international organization in a country like Madagascar, I think migration is, as you rightly said, is one of those non-economic sort of losses from those the impact of climate change in countries like Madagascar. So at our level, we would address it as within investment in education or in bringing opportunities in communities. For example, in those remote communities who doesn't have the opportunity to have who doesn't have the economic opportunity to grow, and who might want to migrate in other regions of Madagascar or abroad. So I think that's where we are playing our role as an international organization to give them back those opportunities that they couldn't have anymore. But we do also still work with government, and we still continue those not only advocacy but support, like joint work with government on public policy on subjects that are important, such as inclusion or addressing the migration issues internally within the country, and continue the conversation with also northern countries, if that makes sense.
Well, before I move on to closing remarks, I would love to just very briefly hear from each of you. We talked about this work being very challenging, depressing at times, very complex. So I'd just love to hear from each of you. What gives you hope? I'll start with you, Ambassador.
Just before we came here, there was the skies open and rain came down. And so we have a project that we're working on in 2 communities that always flood. And most of our iconic photos of people walking through that community, similar to what you see on the video. So my team and I got all geared up. I mean, we did some interventions that were not that expensive. And we look back in our past and see how old-time people used to build culverts and so on. And we did that. And we got geared up, ready to go into the community to support persons, and we had nothing to do. There was no flooding. So I was really excited when we got on the plane anyway coming here. So, for me, for Antigua, it's different to many countries, but I feel I have hope because the community is buying into, looking at old-fashioned ways of doing stuff, which is so easy to do, and doesn't require a 5th degree in some civil engineering, which makes our work a lot easier. So that's really encouraging, and seeing that person can stay in their homes during an event and not have to pack up everything and go to a shelter. I mean, that's encouraging. We still have a long way to go, but that's encouraging. And they send me emails and they send me WhatsApp. Thank you so much. They send photos, no water, before and after photos. So they too are participating in the process and collecting data and enjoying the success.
Ms. Hassan, what gives you hope?
I think definitely the sense of community and cohesion. You have very poor households in the same community who are giving to those who have even less than them. I think that when you see positive support from within the community, that gives you certainly hope. Before I came into the coordination sector of things, I did development projects in education and seeing young girls in school and encouraging them and them doing so well in school. That's also very encouraging. The fact that I'm able to advocate and bring voices to platforms like this is also very important, gives you encouraging. And I actually made a decision a long time ago. It doesn't matter how depressed the world is. If I make a difference to one person, to one child, then that's important for me. So I think I measure it from that level rather than looking at what everybody else is doing. But we still need to push what everybody else is doing, especially the politicians.
Thank you. Ms. Andrea Manantena?
Well, I think it's the same thing all over the world, finally. It's all about the community that gives us most hope. In those communities where we had experienced consecutive droughts and we had a lot of exposure in terms of media internationally because of that. And those communities were visited by so many journalists at some point. But at the end of the day, the life still goes on. And they were, when we were bringing those, what we thought innovation with solar energy and so on, they were actually very comfortable exploring the technology by themselves and finding ways to make it work for themselves. And those kind of things gives us hope, and everything comes from the community, and that's where we need to start.
Yeah. Well, at the end of the day, we're all talking about people and lives. Maybe y'all can relate to that. I know we do have a hard stop in this room, but I would like to invite Mr. Gernot Laganda, who's the Director for Climate Change and DRR Services at WFP, for some brief closing remarks. Thank you.
Turn you here.
Yes, please do.
Thank you so much. I mean, I actually do not feel like this session needs extensive closing remarks. It needs a bit of a bracket because we came here to talk about loss and damage. And so we're bracketing it, I think, in that context. But I don't know how it is for you, but for me, this was an energizing panel. I mean, it's a depressing topic, but I feel that we're all grappling with the different colors on our badges, with it in the best way we can. We're trying to share what we're learning. People like Diane or Mr. Chowdhury, I mean, they have real difficult business in the negotiations, and they're taking their precious time to join us here. I hope that we could give a little bit of that energy back, and wish you, of course, all the best for your important work. So I would really not want to now try and summarize, but just one thing I really heard is there's a lot of press, a lot of euphoria about the Loss and Damage Fund, but let's please not forget this is one very thin line of defense, one of the last ones that we have. There's this mitigation line of defense that needs to be strong, the adaptation line, which has a funding gap that's massive. We have a very thin fledgling line of defense. And if these all fail, the last one is humanitarian action. And this is when you see the WFP trucks rolling and the airdrops, it's already too late. People are in a life-threatening situation. And this is also then not climate justice, right? If you are in a situation like this without protection, then we have already collectively failed. So let's build all these lines together, and let's do it in the spaces that we all inhabit. So thank you very much for joining. Thank you for joining. I wish you a very good remaining time in this conference.
Thank you to our panelists.